is to stay constant. You know, these are talented individuals who have a lot of skill sets beyond basketball and have a lot of interests that sometimes are suppressed because it just wasn't cool to do it when you were in high school, but in college you may be able to pull that violin out again and play it, or you might be able to care about reading a book or write or act. I have a friend who's 7 foot, and he wanted to be an actor, and we used to tease him as a kid, what you gonna play, a tree? You know? But he ended up going to Hollywood and playing, you know, the Predator and all those, you know, the big monsters and all that. And he could do Shakespeare in the Park. But it was one of those things. He wanted to do it and did it, you know?
I just want to mention one thing, because I think it gets to that point about college, and this was something I didn't appreciate until sort of going through this and seeing the guys, is that the narrow margins, I think, for students going through the urban education system, that with their talent and their drive and with good fortune to have mentors in their lives, they can achieve great things and they can kind of move on to the next level. But what I found and what I was sort of saddened by was that often these sort of small mistakes can quickly, without that support system in place, can kind of cascade into something much more serious and get them off track. And then there's not a whole lot, there aren't recruiters out there, even if you were a good athlete, necessarily out there saying, oh yeah, okay, so you blew a scholarship? Oh yeah, come on over here now. And you know, so there's a sort of one strike and you're out sort of piece that I think is something that we, as a culture, we and a society, we should look at more carefully. And in a very small piece, that's what this scholarship fund, named in L. Ray Taylor's memory, is all about. It's called the Second Chance Scholarship Fund, and it's about that very sort of a student who had sort of got off track for whatever reason, helping them get back on track. That's the applicant pool that the scholarship fund is going to be looking for. Actually, someone who's already had a mistake, and unfortunately there have been lots like that, but wanted to kind of give people a way back in.
I told Neil that his book is full of sentiments without being sentimental. One of the things that those little things that I remember, in fact, probably one of the most memorable moment in my 10 years as a headmaster over there is Tony Lee, who is one of the players mentioned in the book. Really tough kids. That's the kind of kids that if you see that dog in the street, you want to walk away. You don't want to get near him. He's really tough. During his senior year, he came to me one day and he said, Mr. Fung, I make the honor roll. And I can see tears in his eye. That was one of the really touching moments. And that's what's so great about Coach O'Brien, because he basically opened the doors for these kids to make sure they understand that it's more than just basketball. Yes, there are other things like academics, be successful in academics that will eventually lead them to all kinds of success in life. And that's the thing. There are several players that was touched that, I mean, they don't expect to be great students, but then when they get the honor roll, you can see how touched they are. I mean, that's how.
We've reached the point in the program where we're going to turn, or I'm going to turn the microphones over to any of you in the audience who have questions to ask, and you can direct your questions to anybody on the panel except me, because the other people on the panel know so much more about the subject than I do. So at this point, you're up. Isn't it exciting to hear your voice?
Right. My name is Tom Fitzgibbon. I'm a retired engineer from MIT and the Draper Lab in Cambridge. And I participated as a volunteer at the Martin Luther King Middle School in Dorchester as part of Northeastern University's RESEED program, Retired Engineers. So in a sense, I was there to be a mentor to these kids trying to study science. Now, for somebody who graduated from high school in 1948, going into a classroom in 2005 in Dorchester was, the only way I can describe it is it contained chaos, absolute chaos. So the task of mentoring these children was very discouraging. I helped put a man on the moon, but I have never felt so inadequate in my life as when I went into that classroom. And every once in a while I would find a kid that I could look into their eyes and I knew these kids are smart. They've got a brain in their head and they deserve a chance. But trying to get through to them and to have them accept me, this old white guy, who's trying to make things interesting for them, I found to be the most enormously challenging task that I've ever encountered. I didn't go back this year because of medical reasons, but I will go back again. But if any of you guys can give me a clue, is how do I imitate Coach O'Brien? What do I have to say to these kids to make them sit up straight, pay attention, and do their homework? Those are the 3 keys to success.
Well, I also have gone into that school. And I went into the Martin Luther King School and spoke to them and ended up being there. They asked me to come back and be their commencement speaker at the end of the year. And I think those 3 things you talk about, first you got to meet them where they are, but you have to earn their respect by showing them that they're going to have to give you some respect. And I think often it's how you're introduced to them. The principal's responsibility in that school is to make sure that your experience there is one that's worth your time. Not supposed to send you into an environment where you are sort of disarmed and they don't get the kind of opportunity to have your talent in their lives. And for me, that's the sort of disappointing thing. When here you are with all that wealth of experience and the commitment to go there, and they need you at that school, all right? But yet, you're not introduced to the classroom in the right way. You're supposed to have had that opportunity to be in that environment with someone guiding the way for you and knocking down some of those obstacles that were in the way so that they can begin to hear you. Because once they hear you, it changes that whole environment. And I know my presence oftentimes in a room, but with middle schoolers, that doesn't matter at all. It's about how you enter that room, And so that, I would say, coming in there with more than just you, with the kind of support that you need, and then we let you loose. I took a judge into a middle school. He stands about this tall and is retired, and he's very meek and very talented. But by the time they figured out this guy's spirit, it changed the whole culture of the room. So it's about how you're introduced, I'm sorry you had that experience because that middle school needs you, and it's a wonderful environment.
Well, don't get me wrong. I enjoy it in a bizarre kind of way.
Yeah. That's why I went back. I enjoyed it in a bizarre kind of way.
But only in the sense that I just see the value in those children. And that, but I just wish I had that magic.
But see, once they see that, they connect with that. Young people connect with, they can smell you. They can smell you when you don't believe in them that way. And then it becomes a bunch of crap to them. But the test is, will you come back? Because so many people disappear in their lives on a daily basis, so they test you. I'm going to give him, even though he's okay, I'm going to check him. Yeah. And then if you come back, and you come back, and you come back, one day you walk in there, and if you didn't show up, they be mad at you. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for participating in this forum. It's been very interesting. And I just did have one question, kind of aimed at the Charlestown program first, and a kind of follow-up for Mr. Motley and Mr. Brown. We've talked a lot tonight about young men, and given the rise exponentially in the last 10 to 15 years of the involvement of girls in gangs, girls in violence, girls in DYS facilities, and even more, most recently, a disturbing upward trend in teenage pregnancy, I'm wondering if Charlestown, sort of bluntly, how did Charlestown's girls basketball team do? Or more specifically, is there a similar gateway for those women and young women at risk in the Charlestown community? And my follow-up to Mr. Motley and Mr. Brown is, have either of you mentored a young woman, or do you ever see your program expanding, Mr. Brown, to include mentors for young women as well?
The Charlestown girls basketball, I'll share with you my first experience with it. The first time they play, I went to see the game. I make sure I go to see the game since I saw the boys' game. And afterwards, I told the girls, you know, the rules of the game is to put the ball into the basket, not just to throw it up in the air. That's how bad it is. But it gets better. But the whole point is this. It's a matter of the coach, like a lot of things. The coach is a decent coach, the Charlestown, in terms of being a coach, but she is not a teacher in the school. So she doesn't spend a lot of time with the students. So it is a totally different world. The thing about Jack O'Brien is that he's willing to commit his time to it. Charlestown has another good teacher who will stay until 5 or 6 o'clock, but they don't come in on Sundays. Jack O'Brien came in on Sundays. Now, I have to go into the school on Saturday and Sunday because he wants to practice. So I go in, open it. So it really is the coach, the person, just like the teacher. It is really the teacher that makes the difference more than anything else.
Yeah, I think there's just getting back to what Dr. Motley was saying too, that students can read people, and they can read them really well. And this is something, because a lot of them, especially athletes, student athletes, a lot of them, even at a young age, have been kind of used by other people to kind of come in, and people can see an athlete kind of on the rise and want to be able to say, yeah, I was with that player. And so they get really smart at who's in it for the long haul, who's coming back, and who's just there for a piece of that, who's sort of insecure about being there in front of them and maybe doing it out of some kind of guilt or other issues, and who's really committed to learning about them, and they get good at that. And so I think, you know, there is no replacement, I think, for time, a sort of commitment of time. It's a kind of crazy amount of commitment that some give, and I think that that can be this draining kind of piece of this, but also sort of a real kind of investment, as you said, to meet them where they are, but kind of bring them along and be not sort of so self-conscious about saying things or offending them or other things, but sort of being invested in their lives, because they'll be able to read that and kind of respond to that. So I think it is a function of commitment and sincerity, really.
The answer to your question is yes. We have programs for young ladies as well. They mirror our programs for young men. When I first started in this business, I was mentoring men, young men. And I got a phone call from someone who had a nationally acclaimed program. The Time Digital Corporation was here. She was receiving all kinds of things and said, I'm tired of people asking me the question, meaning me, the question you just asked me. And so she says, I want to mirror all that you're doing. We set that up. The Paul Robeson Institute for Positive Self-Development, the Mary McLeod Bethune Institute, the Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune Institute for Women Incorporated. Those two things working together are the entities. But the most important thing that happened to me was, you know, the macho part of me was the son that I had at the time. The thing that changed my life was my 2 daughters. The first time I looked her in the eye when I was delivering her, and I said, okay, my life changed. So from that point on, you know, my wife said to me this morning that I'm changing as a fan in the stands, watching these games. I'm becoming a little more sensitive. You know, in other words, I don't like the calls on her and things like that. I'm becoming that parent I used to talk about. So, and for both of them. So the best thing that happened for me was up close and personal. But my life has been filled with all of the young people that come along. And our thing is, you know, the family, you know, to be inclusive that way.
And if I can just echo what Dr. Martley said is what changed my life in thinking, as well as my daughter. My daughter's 3 years old now. So along with my daughter and my 5 goddaughters, you know, I often get that question, you know, well, you're doing Diamond Educators for the men, what about the women? So future plans are, you know, to
The
do
greatest
something
thing we're doing is developing men that will be respectful.
Absolutely.
And all those other kinds of things for these, you know, in that relationship, whether they're good brothers to them, you know, good fathers to them, those kinds of things. We're looking at how we develop them to be that. I'm sorry to step on you, but
No,
that's the deal.
absolutely.
You know.
I was wondering, aside from the cheering and the pride in the basketball team, if this is having any impact academically on the rest of the student body.
Not in terms of academics. As I said, what we were able to do at Charlestown is kind of develop a culture that academic is important, okay, above everything else. The academic performance, the love of books, love of learning. And part of it is that the teacher in that school is highly unusual, not your typical Boston Public School teachers. About a quarter of the teachers graduate from Harvard College or Harvard University. About 80% graduate from the top 25% of the top 25 colleges in the United States. They could have, all of them could have done something else, but they make a commitment to teach in urban school. And the word commitment is, I think, what is adopted also from the basketball team. The basketball team is very committed in terms of what they want to do. The rest of the faculty are like that. So it's not a matter of, oh, the basketball team player could do well academically, so the rest of the school will do that. I don't think that's the case at all.
Good evening. I just wanted to say I appreciate you guys all being here. This is just a wonderful opportunity to discuss some of these issues in more in depth. I am a former teacher at Charlestown High. Mr. Fung can attest to. I was a special ed teacher for a year and substitute for a couple years, and I didn't have a great experience. I'm from Charlestown myself, and I was hoping that Neil, Mr. Swidley, if that's how you pronounce it, did you have an opportunity to reflect on, you know, what it's like for the Charlestown high school students from the neighborhood and the challenges that they had, and if you thought that this idea of busing, of course, you know, what your whole thoughts were on busing. And then to the African-American gentleman, Sean, I remember you when you were playing basketball there. My question is about Bill Cosby and, you know, his philosophy, and you spoke a little bit about that with people being taking care of themselves and their families. And I just wanted to know, as successful gentlemen, have you do you also ascribe to that philosophy?
So I'll start with that. Thanks for the question. As you know, there aren't many Charlestown students anymore at Charlestown High School, and I think that's one of the things that kind of gets lost. I was sort of struck when I began this project at how frozen in time people's perceptions were about the reality of Boston Public Schools, that people's ideas were, you know, about everything. They sort of expected it still to be kind of a towny school. And as you know, it's a handful of Charlestown students, especially outside of the housing projects in Charlestown, that actually go to Charlestown High School. So the school itself in the 70s, up until the 70s, was the center of this very kind of tribal neighborhood. it was tethered to the neighborhood, and it was sort of, the neighborhood revolved around that. And then after busing, you have a school in there that I felt was completely disconnected from the neighborhood around it. And there were some very good things that came out of that. One is that the sort of combustible sort of racial tension between blacks and whites in Charlestown subsided quite a bit. So there wasn't that sort of omnipresent sort of tension there that there was beforehand, and you would know this better than I would. But there wasn't a connection really either. I mean, there was not that much of connection between the neighborhood and the school. And part of that, I think, is the reflection of Charlestown's demographic shift. With a lot of people coming in, the complexion of Charlestown didn't change, although the kind of socioeconomics changed of it. A lot of sort of professionals came in to sort of live in the housing there, attracted by the housing. I was sort of always struck by the fact that the biggest beneficiaries in Charlestown of busing were real estate agents, because prior to busing, there was no real estate market in Charlestown. The houses were sort of passed down from families, and there really wasn't that big thing. Once that sort of trigger came in and people sold the family houses, and it sort of opened up this trove of historic housing so close to the downtown, it kind of opened up what we see now in there, where it's a very desirable place and very expensive place to own property. But I think there is a sort of disconnect that kind of happens now. I sort of thought that sometimes I try to experience this through the eyes of the players. So that was my interface with Charlestown. So I would come in to Charlestown like they did and try to leave Charlestown like they did. And it was interesting to me that there wasn't, unlike in the 70s where it was sort of unsafe for them as young black men to sort of venture beyond the school into the neighborhood. There was not much of an interest because there wasn't that connection. And also, it was pretty striking that here was the best basketball team in the state, winning 5 state championships in 6 years, and there weren't many people in the stands, and definitely not many people from Charlestown itself.
So were you talking to any of the African Americans up here?
Sorry, did I offend you with that?
No, I just wanted to know, can I answer the question?
Sure.
Okay.
That's what I was hoping for.
Okay. What did you interpret Bill Cosby to say?
Yeah, that's a good question. I saw Bill on Meet the Press. I didn't get a chance to read his book, but I interpreted it as kind of hanging out the dirty laundry to dry and calling on African American people to be more personally responsible.
Well, that's something that my grandparents told me a long time ago. I think Bill just had the opportunity to say it because he's a famous person, so it gets the press.
Why do so many people disagree with Bill from the African American?
That's not necessarily true. I think maybe that's an account that might play some places, but it's not the way it is. People agree that there needs to be conversations and work done. That's what this young man and others are doing every day, not standing around lamenting that opportunity doesn't happen. They try to develop the spirit and the mindset to make sure that that goes on within the community. That's what the work is about, starting with the youngsters and sort of making it sort of natural for them to believe that they can achieve at levels that I'm sure were instilled in you from the community you come from as you were growing. And I think that's what that was all about. Even this idea that there's this big, people in the African American community love Bill Cosby. And if, you know, he is the kind of person, he's one of our elders. And as the older you get, and you'll find this out as well, the less patience you have with some things, because you want to see in your lifetime attitudes shift, whether they're among your own people or others, you know. And the whole idea is that, you know, he is prodding folk to keep working towards this goal of making sure that our community begins to, and continues to, this is not new, take care of our young people in a way that helps push them towards the level of success that we know can be instilled in them, and we know that they're destined for with the right kind of support systems and networks. He's just calling on those behind him to not forget that. And as a trumpeter, that's what his responsibility is to our community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if I can just elaborate on, or give you my, since you did pose a question to me on what I thought about it. One, I feel he's entitled to that. What I use it for is to my young men. I mean, we read about it, they watch it, and we start dialogue and talk about it and see what their point of views are, about the issues are. And that way it's just going back and forth also to let them know these are things that that is being said. How do you feel about it? What are you going to do about it? So I use it to teach, the younger men and also to educate them. So, I mean, but he's entitled to his opinions.
Since you did address me, I'll close with a short story, positive story. Doesn't involve Curry, but one of my favorite basketball stories involves a young man named Jamil Abdullah. He was 6'8" when he was in high school. He was highly recruited by Division I schools. He went to a Division I, he grew up here in Boston, went to a Division I school down south. They paid no attention to him. They wanted him to redshirt. Nobody paid any attention to his academics. He flunked out and came home. But he was such a good basketball player that he was recruited by another Division I school down south, and he went down there, and he started out, and once again, they paid very little attention to him. He wasn't really going to be in their plans for another year or so. Nobody paid any attention to his academics. He got homesick. He couldn't understand what they were doing in the classroom, and he flunked out. He was playing in a neighborhood tournament at the Reggie Lewis Center, and another fellow saw him playing and said, have you got any eligibility left? And he said, well, I think I still have a couple of years left. I'm not really quite sure how the system works. And they looked it up and they found out that he did. He enrolled at Roxbury Community College, played on a national championship team, Division III junior college, succeeded magnificently on the basketball court, great player. Much more important, 2 teachers at Roxbury, one a physics teacher and one a math teacher, both of them white, incidentally, recognized in this kid that he was rapidly getting to the point where he was taking the most difficult math and physics courses that the college offered. In fact, was the only U.S. citizen in those courses. Everybody else was Japanese, Ethiopian, Chinese, and everything else. So they got to talking, these 2 teachers, one day and said, this kid has a hell of an aptitude for math and physics and science in general. We ought to make sure that he gets somewhere else because he hasn't got any basketball eligibility left. He's used it all up. And they got to talking to some people at Northeastern, and before you know it, this kid had a full scholarship to finish his college career at Northeastern, and he's now working as an engineer. He told me in one of the conversations that we had that he was on the 7-year plan as far as getting through college. But it worked. And it worked in part because of basketball, because Roxbury Community College probably wouldn't have come into the picture if he wasn't still such a good basketball player after 2 bad experiences in college. But it mostly worked because he was a very bright fellow, and his potential was recognized by 2 people who could help him out in ways that had nothing at all to do with basketball. Which is in part what we've been talking about here tonight. So I'm really glad you brought the question up because I think it speaks to an ongoing complex issue. The world of Division I football and basketball especially is still replete with corruption and hypocrisy and the most hideous instances of young men and in some cases women as well being taken advantage of by